Are you sitting there? Oh, you're moving.
I've warmed it up for you, Joe. And the trick with this mic is that it's very directional. You've got to pull it over to you.
Okay.
Okay, maybe while we're getting started here, I'll call this meeting to order, and I am very pleased to have Genoa Patrick from JP2G here to do a presentation. Is that?
Yes,
and I'm going to move out of the road.
Welcome. I don't know if I've met all of you, but I certainly know some of you. My name is Joe Genoa with JP2G, and I brought Julie Lantos. Oh, missed up on my first instruction. To kind of handle the computer controls here. So I think everybody's got a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, just so you can follow along. What we have on the first slide here is just the project overview, kind of the main topics that we're going to talk about. And you can see there the three main topics are the Small Communities Fund application. You've already spent a few minutes talking about that a little earlier. And of course the key issue here is that the Cobden wastewater treatment plant upgrade has received funding from the upper levels of government under this particular fund application. Let me try this again. How's this? The other area I'll be talking about is the municipal class environmental assessment process that we have to follow to obtain approval for the project. And then I'd like to talk about JP2G project management services we'd like to offer, helping out the municipality in terms of managing the project, and I'll spend a few minutes talking about that. Okay, this complex chart that you see here, I'm not going to really spend much time on it. It could probably take a half an hour just on its own. But this is the municipal class environmental assessment planning and design process. It's, as I said just a minute ago, it's the approval process that we have to follow in terms of designing or getting the project approved. You can see just across the tabs along the top in green, phase 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. Just to say a word about each phase. Phase 1 talks about the identifying the problem statement. What are the problems? What are the problem issues with respect to the project? You identify those, and under phase 2, you can see the subtitle there, Alternative Solutions. The intent is to identify alternative solutions to fix the problem issues, and as part of that, we have to identify viable options, viable solutions to do that, and analyze them, including their impacts on the environment. And you can see under phase 2, if you follow those blocks down, second from the bottom, you end up selecting the preferred solution. Okay, that's kind of a planning phase. From there, you go into phase 3. We would have selected a preferred solution, and under phase 3, we look at alternative design concepts. We're kind of narrowing in with respect to the design. As I said, the preferred solution under phase 2 is kind of a planning solution, broad-based. Under phase 3, we look at getting more specific in terms of coming up with alternative design concepts, and for those alternative design concepts, again, we look at analyzing them, including their impacts on the environment. And if you follow the blocks down, you can see where we end up third from the bottom, selecting a preferred design. And then we swing over to phase 4. Phase 4. The key to phase 4 is the environmental. Can you see the red button kind of along the top of the screen there? That's the areas that I'm talking about. Julie's trying to keep pace here with me as I go along. The environmental study report, that documents the whole process and summarizes how we end up with the preferred design concept. And after that report is completed, it has to go through a public review process. I shouldn't say that. It's placed in the public record, and there's normally a 30-day period for the public to get an opportunity to review it and offer comments or suggestions in the event that they have any. Okay. Oh, I should say the last phase, phase 5, is the implementation phase. Under phase 4, the recommendation from the environmental study report, we end up with the preferred design concept. Under phase 5, it gets implemented, and that's where we get into the design, the engineering design, and preparation of contract documents for the project. And then that then goes into the tender phase. It's tendered for, and a contractor is selected to do the actual construction of the project. That's it in a nutshell. Now, under the municipal class environmental assessment planning and design process, how all of this got started, our company, JP2G, was retained last March, essentially as engineer of record, to initiate this class environmental assessment process. And the bullets that you see there are the issues, kind of the thrust of the work that we did. Just following through, we did an assessment. We assessed the condition of the sewage treatment plant. We identified, as a result of that, we were able to identify plant problem issues. We identified options to upgrade the plant capacity. We provided cost estimates for viable options that we identified. And then we summarized all of that and provided sufficient documentation to support an application under the SCF funding program. In other words, we did enough work in our minds such that we had good enough supporting documentation so that we could come up with a realistic cost estimate as to what the project was going to cost, so that we had that information to supporting information to include in the application. So we're satisfied. We're satisfied that that the estimates that we'd come up with as part of that exercise in doing those items of work, that we've got some realistic numbers that were included in the application for the project approval. Okay, continuing on with the environmental assessment report, as I said, the phase 1 part of it was the problem statement, and this just gives you an overview of the problem issues related to the sewage plant project, and you probably know most of these. I'll just run through them quickly. Is there an opportunity here for questions? Should address it to the chair. Is there an opportunity for questions as we're going along, or do you want to leave it till kind of the
I was thinking waiting till your presentation was finished, and then at that time we would open it up for discussion. But it's certainly up to yourself.
Whatever works.
Then we'll let you go ahead, and we'll have discussions at the last.
Okay. Well, let me just summarize these quickly. As I say, most of you have probably heard of many of them. I think it's well documented. The sewage flows at the wastewater treatment plant are exceeding the treatment capacity, the approved treatment capacity of the plant as provided under the certificate of approval from Ministry of the Environment. Therefore, additional capacity is required for future growth. Another major issue is stormwater inflow infiltration into the sanitary sewer, and that was just discussed a few minutes ago as well. It is an issue here within the system that you've got here in Cobden. The Cobden wastewater treatment plant is 35 years old, and it's at the point that it needs a major upgrade of most of its equipment. I mean, it's being maintained, it's working well, it's doing a job, but it's come to the point after 35 years that there is major upgrade of equipment that needs to be done. And one of the issues, another one of the key issues is bypasses of raw sewage. I think I heard that there was a bypass just yesterday or the day before. And I understand that that happens during major storm events. Well, not only does it happen during major storm events, it happens from the work that we've done, it happens during high spring melt conditions during the runoff in the spring. And it also happens when major service work has to be carried out on the sewage plant. And the reason for that is, I'll just talk briefly about the next bullet. The Cobden plant requires a parallel treatment system in accordance with current MOE design guidelines. So if something happens with the existing plant, it's referred to as a single treatment plant. If something happens to one of the components within that single treatment plant, the whole single train has to be bypassed, and the raw sewage is bypassed around the plant, and of course discharged out into Muskrat Lake. And you know, at some point that can be problematic in terms of the MOE deciding to. They do fine or in other municipalities where raw sewage is discharged into river waters or into the lake kind of thing. So it's something that if there is an opportunity, certainly the problem should be addressed. And the last bullet, again, it's something I'm sure you're all aware of. The Cobden wastewater treatment plant discharges into Muskrat Lake and requires, I've said here, tertiary treatment. It's a high level of treatment. Most plants in the Ottawa River Valley area have secondary treatment. This is, I won't get into the technicalities of that, but it's a next step to provide higher treatment. Well, I could say briefly what it does. It reduces the amount of phosphorus going out by a factor of almost 10. Now, phosphorus is one of the main problems with the algae blooms that you see with Muskrat Lake that are being experienced on the lake. As a matter of fact, there was just an article in the Ottawa Citizen yesterday talking about the very issue. So that quickly, those are the problem issues that are there as part of the plant, and we just wanted to spend a few minutes going through it. I know this is a big project, and you know, there's always the issue. Somebody's sitting back and thinking, well, why do we have to spend all this money? Those are the kind of issues that you're dealing with. The assessment of the Cobden sewage plant, I just briefly referenced that. We have prepared a report. It's included in the, I think we gave you a package of the reports that we had done, not as part of this package. It could have been last fall, and I forgot to bring my copy.
I'm sure you did, Joe, file, but
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of work done on it, but there is a draft report, environmental assessment report for the work that we've done to date. And one of the parts of that is the report on the plant condition of the wastewater treatment plant, and kind of details that we get into the report. We talk about each of the, when I say unit process assessment, each of the units, each of the components in the sewage plant. It's addressed, it's looked at, and we report on the condition. We report on the mechanical and electrical systems and identify the problems, whether certain things comply with current standards or they don't. And we go through all of that and we come up with a list of recommendations at the end of that report. And that's attached to the draft copy of the environmental assessment report that we've done to date. The alternative solutions. Again, as part of the Class CA process, we've got to identify alternative solutions. The ones that we've come up with are listed there. Alternative one is the do nothing alternative. That seems counterproductive, but it's one of the alternatives that needs to be looked at, and it kind of serves as a benchmark for that the others can be compared against. Alternative two is the infiltration and stormwater inflow problem that we briefly talked about. Water getting into the sanitary sewer system, and it ends up, of course, at the sewage plant, and in some cases upsets the treatment process there, and it certainly supplies a lot of extra water that has to be treated, and of course increases the operating costs. Alternative number 3, upgrading of existing sewage plant. That comes directly from the recommendations of the report on assessing the Cobden sewage plant. Alternative number 4A is a new mechanical treatment plant that would be constructed in parallel with the existing plant. And by constructing it in parallel with the existing plant, that gives you this parallel train setup that I was talking about. Something goes wrong in one treatment train, you've got the second treatment train providing you redundancy, so you can continue to treat sewage. And there's that's 4A. There's a 4B. We haven't done much investigation on it, but there's been some discussion about a lagoon that may have existed there to service the community years and years ago to treat sewage. And you can see it in aerial photographs. And I don't know how much time that you may want to spend on it, but if it turns out to be feasible, there is a potential for it costing a fair bit less. There'd be a cost savings with that option, for instance, as compared to option 4A. So it's just put on there. We haven't spent much time investigating it. And then alternative 5 is replacing the existing sewage plant and installing 3 new mechanical treatment plants. Okay. Getting back to alternative 2, reducing extraneous flows to the sewage plant. This is another report. We spent time on that particular topic, and we prepared a draft inflow and infiltration study. That's the inflow of stormwater, extraneous flows, if you like, that are getting into the sanitary sewer system. The infiltration study is stormwater, surface water, or groundwater that seeps down, percolates into the soil, and then finds cracks in the pipe or cracks around the manholes, and can kind of seep into the sanitary sewer. It may not sound like much, but if you look at that over the extent of a large system, the number of linear feet of linear meters of pipe that you have, it all adds up, and it ends up with a fairly significant amount of extra water that has to be treated at the treatment plant. Alternative 3, upgrading the existing sewage plant. As I say, we've looked at that, and we've got some proposed upgrades, and those, and we've costed those, so we have a handle as to what that would involve. Alternative 4A, the new mechanical treatment plant. We've done the same thing with it. We spent a bit of time looking into that potential option, and we've got some estimated costs that we think are realistic for that particular option. Next. So for each of those options, there are preliminary costs, not for each of them, but certainly for most of them, where we've spent time trying to come up with reasonable, realistic costs. And some of them we don't have enough information right at this stage. For instance, with respect to alternative 2 and trying to assess the I&I, the infiltration and stormwater inflow into the system, to try and identify how that could be, measures that could be implemented to help in that regard. We don't have that costed, and we don't have the new aerated lagoon system costed. A lot of it is going to, if we do decide to go that route, a lot of it is going to depend on soil conditions, soil studies, whether or not, or to what extent liners have to be put in place to be able to contain the water while it's being treated. The last one that's highlighted there in bold is the possible preferred alternative solutions. So having done all of that work, taken a look at all of the viable options as we see it, based on the investigation that we've done, we've come up with what we've called a possible preferred alternative solutions. And the reason, maybe just slide to the next slide, Julie. reason that that we call it possible is that they've got promise at this point, and they're considered possible at this point, but they're still subject to the public consultation process. That hasn't been done as part of the work that we've done at this stage. And if you recall that class environmental assessment flowchart that we looked at the start, once we get into selecting, or once we get into picking a preferred solution, we've got to go through the public consultation process. We contact public agencies, we can hold a public information session, that kind of thing, and get input from the public. And that could have an effect as to what is actually selected. But if you just go back to it, sorry. So what we're suggesting as a potential recommended solution is, of course, doing an upgrade on the plant, and it would consist of alternative number 3, upgrading the existing plant, the existing sewage plant. As I say, I mean, it's got the basic fundamentals are there. There has to be an upgrade done to the equipment, to the process equipment. But in conjunction with that, there's an opportunity, we believe, to do a couple of other things. One is to build a new plant in parallel with the existing upgraded plant. And so you see alternative number 4 there, or 4A, or 4B, if the lagoon option turns out to be feasible. And then we've also included alternative number 2. It might be feasible to look at some locations where stormwater inflow measures can be taken to do repairs or replace certain problematic conditions, and reduce significantly some of the groundwater that's getting into the system, or stormwater that's getting into the system. And all that would go towards helping with the capacity of the plant, of course. If you're letting less groundwater get in, you're ending up with less sewage that you're treating at the sewage plant, which increases the amount of capacity that you've got for treating sewage from existing development as well as future development. Okay, that little discussion that I've gone through on the steps that we've gone through to date essentially is phases 1 and phases 2 as is highlighted in that blue box. If everyone can follow that, and it's also in your handouts. I mean, you can go through this if there is an interest. You can go through it and kind of have a more detailed look at it later on. So the work that we now have to continue to do to complete this entire process carries on from there. We would now have to go through the public consultation process with respect to the alternative solutions that we've identified. And you can see towards the bottom of block of phase 2, the second from the bottom, based on the input that we get from that public consultation process, we end up selecting the preferred solution. We take that preferred solution and then we go up to the top of phase 3, and that's where we get into the next step that I had talked about, identifying alternative design concepts for the preferred solution and taking a look at or analyzing those.
Sorry, do you mind if I ask a question? So I just want to be clear on the grant and the funding that we've received, because there's a dollar total attached with that, and I just looking through the presentation, I see that there's.
You've jumped ahead.
Okay, and I won't get to that at all. But so my question is, the funding that we've received of the $6.4 million, whatever we received, does that take into consideration numbers 2, 3, and 4?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so we're not talking about hypothetical here. We're talking about that these are actually going forward.
That's right.
Okay, and I understand you're going through the process of how we got there, but if we're already there, I'd kind of like to focus on what we're doing going forward. And I know it's been a ton of work. I really get that, but I have a lot of questions once we get to the kind of number crunching. Good questions.
Good. Well, that's just what I was, getting to, what we're gonna be doing going forward. Just go back to the, previous slide there, Julie. So, as I said, the blocks that are within that, blue framed area is what we've done, and now we've got to carry on with the other blocks. Okay? So, under phase 3, we've got to identify alternative design concepts, evaluate those, including the impacts on the environment, and then we document all of that in an environmental study report. But before we get to that point, we've got to go through the public consultation process again. You're getting input, and that could make a difference to the not a drastic difference, but you know, there may be some changes incorporated into the tentative preferred solution, if you like. Once we get all that input, then we select the preferred design concept. All of that information and the whole process that we've gone through is all documented in what's called an environmental study report. And that has to be placed on the public record, normally for 30 days. And the public gets an opportunity to review it and make comments. So there's still that part of the process to do. Can we switch to the next slide then? So JP2G Project Management Services, I guess one thing we're here to do is offer our services as far as assisting the municipality in managing the project. It is a complex project. We spent quite a bit of time talking about all the different phases and the complexities of it, but I'm just going to try and touch on some of them here to kind of give you a sense of the types of services that we could provide.
Go ahead, Christine.
Thank you. Maybe it would help for me to clarify that JP2G was retained for phase 1 and phase 2. And now, moving forward with the project, that's why in my report that resolution is before you, to retain them for the next phases.
Okay, so the first, under project management services, really the first order of business was was us assisting with your staff, the municipality here, in connection with making the small community fund application, and as you know, it was successful. So if we take a look at the monies that have been approved, this is taken right out of the application. This, in other words, it's the funding that's been approved, and it outlines in the left-hand column. It outlines the different activities or tasks, the environmental assessment work that needs to be done. The next item, design. Can you all see that? The design and engineering services that would have to be retained by an engineering consultant to design the plant. The project management services, which we're talking about providing. And then the next items, leasing of equipment, construction, materials, communications, we've all lumped that in together as part of the construction costs. So those are shown there as well. And then we have a line item for miscellaneous, which is really things like a contingency. And I know in previous programs that I've been involved, the miscellaneous item also includes costs that the municipality incurs that are deemed to be eligible. Things like putting on a sod turning ceremony or the ribbon cutting. What isn't eligible is at least it hasn't been on previous studies that I've been, or projects that I've been involved in, is charging time for municipal staff that have worked on these, because of course they're going to have to put time in, but that isn't eligible. And that's not me making that decision. But you'd have to check the program requirements. I haven't seen it in connection with this project. But in any case, that lays out the costs, and it shows well, I guess we're a year off, because of the, at one point you were talking that they want their applications submitted so quickly. Well, when it comes to making or approving these projects, they take their time, and we've already lost a whole year, so this thing has to be shifted back. So instead of starting in 2014-15 fiscal year, we'd be getting going here in 2015-16 fiscal year, and finishing up in 2019-2020 fiscal year. Okay, and you can see the total cost there of $10,448,757, and that includes HST. Of course, the municipality gets that portion back, and of the portion that remains, the net amount, 2/3 of that is provided through upper level government funding, grant funding, and then 1/3 has to be flooded by the municipality. Any questions on those? Pardon? Okay. Next slide, Angela. So I'm just going to run through some of the tasks that would be provided under the project management services. I know that one of the first orders of business is to prepare initial project report, and as I say, I haven't seen that. The information package, I think, it's gone to the municipalities.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it has, and I have the agreement ready to sign. I don't want to sign it until September, because within 5 days of signing it, the first initial report is due at the ministry, and we would need JP2G's assistance to do that. So I'll be bringing the agreement to the September 2nd committee meeting, and it can be ratified at the September 16th full committee meeting, and it is due at the ministry on September 18th, so that's the proposed timeline.
The next task that's highlighted there would be preparing proposal documents for design of the selected plant upgrade design concept, and we would be preparing an RFP document along with assistance from the municipality, the township staff, and the intent there would be to go out for proposals, request for proposals to engineering consulting firms with experience in designing plants, and we'd administer that proposal call process on your behalf. We'd put together terms of reference and receive the proposals, evaluate the proposals, and then come up with a report summarizing our findings, and review it with you, and then make a decision on who should be awarded the design. And then, of course, once we get into the design, we then continue on and help with the administration of the design phase of the project, managing project scope changes, what happens if some unforeseens happen, there's different soil conditions encountered, that kind of thing. We would get involved with the engineers or the soils consultants, take a look at what those cost implications are, and review them with you. We'd review and recommend on progress payments that are submitted by the design engineer. If they submit claims claiming they're 30% complete, we of course would have reviewed the drawings and satisfied ourselves in our minds that yes, they are 30% complete, and that's part of what we do in the next line item, reviewing the design progress. And those are typical milestones, doing the review at 30%, 66%, 97%, 100% completion. One of the key things is to make sure that as the engineers are doing the design, and even at the early stage of the design, make sure that we get input into the municipality, or into that design from the municipality and your plant operators as to as to what they'd like to see incorporated into the design. Now, in some cases, there might have to be a little bit of restraint along those lines to stay within the budget, but certainly to the extent that we can, you want to see input from the people that are actually running the plant. And other items that can be of value is to take a look at doing a value engineering session to see if you can identify options in the engineer's design that may be more cost effective, and to do life cycle costing. The life cycle costing, I'm sure you're familiar with that. You don't want to buy something that's the cheapest and find out it's costing much more over the long run than if you were to spend money on something that's more expensive initially, but saves you maintenance costs and operational costs over the years. So those are the kinds of things we're looking at there. Next. And administer the construction phase of the project. Similarly, as we talked about administering the design phase, we'd be administering the construction phase, and that would be a fairly involved one. Preparing the tender documents initially, we'd get the design package from the design consultants, prepare the tender documents, and look after the tender call process. We'd review and report on tenders received, and then through the construction, we'd be attending at regular construction site meetings. Here again, as scope changes come up, requests for changes because of conditions that are encountered that nobody had foreseen. We'd look at those, look at the cost implication, and we would report those to you to see, or make a recommendation to see whether we could include them, or whether they should be modified, or whether they should be not included. Those kinds of things all take place over the course of the construction, and we'd be monitoring the payment certificate process. We'd get a certificate, a payment for a certificate payment being requested by the contractor, and of course we have to satisfy ourselves that work has actually been completed. We go through that process, and we then submit the payment certificate to the municipality with a recommendation on paying it. We'd also check that the right paperwork has been attached, a statutory declaration, those kinds of things. The next item.
This would include inspection also?
We'd retain. It would include assistance with inspection, but we'd retain the design consultant to provide inspection on a regular interval, say a monthly or bi-weekly, bi-weekly basis, or at milestone conditions, say the framing was done and before they start closing it in, we'd want the design structural engineer to go through there. The fellows that design it are responsible for the design. And to be responsible for the design and to be responsible for that aspect of it, they've got to be given an opportunity to inspect it.
Quality control then, yeah.
That's all part of quality control, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
That's a hot button.
I would like to hold all the questions until we're completed, and then at that point, because as time is, let's get this finished. Let Mr. Genoa go ahead and complete it, and then at that point, we will open it for discussion.
Almost done. Assisting with plant commissioning, substantial completion, deficiencies, and final completion. That's a key thing. The plant commissioning of a sewage plant, water plant, they're complex works, and it's got to be done carefully. It's got to be done in a systematic way. There's a lot of different trades and parties that are involved, so we would help oversee that process. And then, of course, we'd also be monitoring and overseeing the correction of deficiencies, and the final completion certificate. Now, that brings us to the last item there. Again, it's a critical item, and that's just coordinating the transfer of project closeout information, and that's things like record drawings, operating and maintenance manuals, There's an operations manual that has to be prepared as part of the plant completion for the operator's use, explaining all the processes within the plant, their maintenance requirements, that kind of thing. So key stuff that sometimes slides through the cracks, but that would be part of one of our responsibilities, to make sure that that is all brought together. We go through it to make sure it's meaningful, and then we make sure that it gets to your operators, make sure that the municipality gets copies, so you've got them for your records. I thought we were almost done. Let me just skim through this quickly. Provide monthly progress reports. That sort of runs through all of those phases of project management services. That's just to keep you abreast as to what's going on. As project managers, of course, one of the main functions is to watch project costs, compare it against the budget, the monies that you have available. The same thing with the schedule. Are we on schedule? Are we not on schedule? What adjustments that have to be made? And of course, quality control, as you mentioned earlier, how is a key function, part of that. Provide cost accounting. We look at monitoring the costs, setting up spreadsheets, so that you can see how the costs are flowing for the project. This is something that Julie would be or has done and helped us out with on similar projects in the past. And a key item there is doing the cash flow forecast. How much money is to be spent over the next quarter? This is something typically that the upper levels of government like to see, so that they can budget for their own purposes in terms of making sure that they've got money available to pay. It's just not this one project, of course, that they've got going on. They've got a whole slew of them going on. So they're going to need this information, and that's the type of information that we would prepare. Report on project costs, issues, costs, and schedules, and then attending at regular meetings with township staff, council, just to keep you abreast as to what's going on, and bringing up issues that need to be discussed, particularly in the matter, as I said, of change order requests, that type of thing. And here was the final one that I was final item I was looking towards. Doing up the final completion report, like a completion report, like anything else. You're not done until the paperwork is done. We put together the final completion report, report on major project issues, and part of the exercise that we go through, again for your information, is what the final costs are, how do they compare against the initial project estimates, and the reasons for the variances. Almost like a lessons learned type of exercise. It's all packaged up in there. Still there. It's the questions period.
Okay, I would like to say thank you, Joe, for your presentation. Now I will open it up for discussion. Any questions? Are we all complete? We're all happy then with the project? The CAO.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, just to clarify one point, going back to Mr. Genota's comments about the cash flow forecast. That will be crucial for our treasurer, so that we're drawing down on our borrowing at exactly the right time, and that our cash flow, that we're not borrowing too early and we're not borrowing too late, that we have a really good handle on our cash flow as the project rolls out.
Yes, Mayor Johnson.
Yes, I do have a question. Being that you're local, I assume that we will have an expedient system in which we can solve problems ASAP to continue going on. Construction companies and consultants have a habit of charging for wasted time. So that would be, to me, that's very key, that we can react to situations very quickly.
Well, let me put it this way. There's 8 of us from our firm that live in the municipality, including myself and Julie. So we've got a vested interest in making sure that we do exactly that and respond in a quick manner.
Okay. Councillor Jackson.
I think it's just with regards to the agreement that comes into place later on, and I'll send those questions to Christine and copy council, just to make sure some of that wording is covered, especially when you say the cash flow, is that to look at the reports that are going to be required and to make sure that that reporting information is available to Janota Patrick, to JP2G, and that it's offset in any agreement that we have as well, that's in a timely fashion and the proper reporting requirements are all covered. But I could go on. There's a list of things that I've dealt with in a couple of municipalities that I've worked for, so I'll send you those by email. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Olmsted.
So attend regular council meetings and give them reports. If they take this long, we're gonna have to give you your own council meeting, I think. But on a serious note, I do know there's been projects to the east and the west of us that have significant cost overruns. You only need to go up the road here a little bit, and there's a catastrophe in terms of the final cost of that project. So I think we really need to be very careful and dot our I's and cross our T's and make sure that all the cost analysis is very, very close to what is projected. So
definitely a key point, and one of the things that we'll have to watch closely and be on top. I mean, we're in the business. We see that. I know what you're talking about in terms of projects running over. So we're definitely gonna be sensitive to it. I should say that there are contingency amounts within the project, as I mentioned when we were looking at that table of costs. So there is a little bit of leeway, but that still doesn't mean that we shouldn't be being very careful about the costs as the project is proceeding.
Go ahead.
Just the one question regarding HST. So do we actually pay for the HST and get rebates on that, or how does that typically work? So of the 10.4 million, we're actually only paying 9.1, and we're not paying the. Okay.
That's why the numbers are Mark's asked the same question. That's why those numbers differ from what you saw with the 9.3 for the total project. It's just that rebate.
Okay, is there any other questions? If not, I have a motion here. Okay, I have a motion moved by Dave Mackay, second by Kathy Rager. Be it resolved that the Environmental Services Committee of the Township of Whitewater Region recommend to Council appoint JP2G Consultant Enterprise as our engineer of record to oversee the upgrades to the Cobden sewer plant. JP2G will design the tender, make a recommendation to council to award the tender once the bids close, and be project managers of for the duration of the project, including assisting the treasurer with the complex recordings required for the grants. All in favor? Motion is carried.
And we're going to have agreement, like you said, in September, right? To that effect, sort of thing. We're going to have an agreement with JP2G to that effect come September. Yeah, thank you.
No, the agreement we have is with OMAFRA for the grant funding. It's the Small Communities Fund agreement with the provincial government who are administering the program.
So are we going to have an agreement with JP2G with regards to the project management of this?
Yes, we will.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's my...
There'll be two separate agreements, one with the ministry for our commitment to the funding and that we're putting up our third of the project, and then a second agreement with our project managers.
Perfect. Thank you.
on behalf of council, I'd like to say thank you, Joe, for
Thank
great
you. Thank you very much. We look forward to working with you.
And thank you as well.
on this project.
Julie? Okay, I have a motion here, moved by Chris Olmsted, second by Charlene Jackson. Be it resolved that the council in committee meeting being held August the 19th, 2015 be extended past 9 o'clock. All in favor? If we have to? Passed. Carried. Thank you. Oh, good heavens, you can read that one.
You want me to?
Yep.
You gotta go.
Okay, we're going to carry on, please. It's moving on. Time is getting by, so I have a motion here that Hope is going to go ahead and read.
So the next item is the Nelson Gervais request, moved by Kathy Regier, seconded by Dave Mackay. Be it resolved that the Environmental Services Committee of the Township of Whitewater Region recommends that Council declare Part Lot 16 EFC Westmeath as in Plan R69735 to be surplus, appraised to determine fair market value and offered for sale to the public with proper notice as per bylaw 01-06-32. The Township's lawyer's legal opinion, last obtained on March 18th, 2013, is that there to be notice on title indicating the property had been used as a waste disposal site and the municipality is making no representations or warranties regarding environmental issues. Subsequent buyers will have this disclosure on title to protect the Township in the future. Discussion?
Thank you, Chair.
Christine.
Thank you. So just a quick overview. There's reports, there's the original letter, reports from Annette, you know, the lawyer's notes. This is a landlocked parcel that was apparently the La Paz waste site or dump many, many years ago. It is of no value to us whatsoever. It certainly seems to be of value to Mr. Gervais. So, and again, our lawyer, Bill Instance, feels that we would be protected with this notification on title that would roll on to subsequent future owners so that nobody's coming back saying, I didn't know, and that we make no warranty about, you know, possible contamination because we have no idea what's in there. So that's the nutshell version.
Kathy.
Darrell, am I right in saying, did this not come before us in the last council? And I thought at that time, now your memory is better than mine, but we had some concerns about this. Or am I thinking of a different parcel of land?
No, I think you're thinking about the same parcel of land. I think one of the main concerns was that if we open it up to, because it has to go, Christine, it has to go to public tender. Isn't that correct?
That's correct. As per the lawyer's note, we have a policy on surplus property. It would have to be declared surplus. There's an entire process that would have to go through. Mr. Gervais may or may not be the only person who puts in a bid. He may or may not be the successful purchaser, but we have to follow our surplus property bylaw.
Yeah, but Kathy, you're absolutely correct. It did come up. I don't remember there being any concerns as a landfill, if that had any. And what Christine is saying that we have covered did our due diligence.
Yes, those were the concerns at the time about what kind of responsibility do we take if there's an issue with anything that arises out of it being a former waste site. So this recommendation is here to cover us. And I guess, you know, this is a landlocked piece surrounded by Mr. Gervais' property. Who else would want to bid on it, I can't imagine. But one never knows.
Go ahead, Kat.
Sorry, but I just thought there was an issue around the environmental aspect of it, because it was a dump at one time, and I thought at that time we had agreed we would hang on to it. I may be totally wrong.
No, I do recall that conversation, and the lawyer's opinion is that if we follow this process and put a notice on title indicating that the property had been used as a waste disposal site and the municipality is making no representations or warranties regarding environmental issues. So it's buyer beware. We've told you, if you want to buy it, don't think of coming back on us with issues because you have been made aware that it's a former waste site.
Well, then it's dragged on for a long time. We should have just approved it the last time around. I don't know why we didn't, but here we are back. Let's do it tonight. Thank you.
Councillor Olmsted.
Just reading the letters from both lawyers, is Mr. Gervais aware of the process that we are going to declare it surplus? I see that they're in agreement to prepare documents, etc., but I didn't see that he's aware that we're going to declare it surplus.
I can't answer that question, Councillor. I don't know if he's aware of that or not.
Go ahead, Councillor Olmsted.
So I'm prepared to vote on it if this is our lawyer's stance, but I think we should contact Mr. Gervais to make him aware that this is the process that we're going to engage.
Sorry, oh, apparently that's in Annette's note. What does the document look like? Oh, the long memo from Annette. Apparently it's referenced in there.
Go ahead.
Even respecting that there maybe has been some notice, can we make a motion that we will notify, because it's Mr. Gervais that has brought this to council, so we notify Mr. Gervais that this is the process we're going to follow?
Okay. I'm just wondering, Doug, do you have any comments on this?
I don't think that Mr. Gervais would think it's going out to public tender because he owns the property all around it, and he would think that nobody else would ever want it. So I think you're right, we probably should notify him that that's the process that we're going to follow.
Councillor Jackson.
So can we table that motion until he's notified so that, I don't know if he wants to take any other action with regards to trying to find more information on the original transfer where he thought it was going to be transferred back to him. I know that the memo from Annette Mantefel is only to the members of council and was not provided to Mr. Gervais as far as I know, but
that, if I may.
Go ahead, Christine.
Quoting from Annette's memo, I then advised him, being Mr. Gervais, that based on the township's current bylaw, the property must be declared surplus, an appraisal obtained for the property, and it would be advertised for sale. So he has been completely notified of the process, which he may or may not choose to ignore.
I don't see where that is. Sorry, Christine. If you could...
This memo, it's dated 28/03/2013. Second paragraph.
Is there two memos?
Yeah, there were two memos from Annette. This is the second one. It's longer.
Okay, sorry. Yep. Thank you.
So that it pretty much tells the complete story. And I explained, quote, I explained the whole process to Mr. Gervais twice, and the fact that the township must follow certain procedures. Now,
I'm good with that.
I would, it would be fine if you directed me to tell him a third time to write another letter explaining the same thing.
My problem is it's been 2 years.
Yeah.
Maybe he should
Let's go. I'm gonna go to Kathy first and then to Reeve Miller.
Well, I'm prepared, after all of this, to vote on this tonight. I'm not ready to move it again. Let's vote on this tonight. We have enough information. If we need to add it into the motion, that we contact Mr. Gervais, and I agree with Councillor Olmsted. I think that's just a courtesy call on our part to do that. If we need to put that into the motion in order to get this passed tonight, let's do it. Thank you.
Reeve Miller. Are you good? Okay, is everybody good then?
Yep.
Okay. Do you want Hope to read it again, or are we ready to vote? Everybody's ready to vote? All in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Do we want to add, though, that Mr. you've already did? Okay. Okay. I have another motion here. Be it resolved that the council in committee of the Township of Whitewater Region adjourn the meeting of August the 19th, 2015 at 9:28 p.m. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.